The woman my husband was seeing outside our marriage confronted me arrogantly. I smirked coldly, dialed my assistant, and froze all of my husband's bank accounts. He panicked, dropped to his knees, and begged me, "Please don't leave me." The next moment, I left them utterly stunned. Some things, when broken, can never be mended, leaving one trapped for a lifetime. Let's get straight to the story, Hannah cheated. In the 3 years since we got married, she had been nothing but attentive to me. She would inform me of her travel plans, bring me gifts every time she went on a business trip, and surprise me with unique gestures on every holiday. She even said that, if I wanted, every day could feel like a celebration. Meanwhile, I stayed home, doing my best to be a supportive spouse. After all, I had been raised to be a tool for a strategic marriage. I thought that over time, we would grow to love each other and settle into a peaceful life together. People always talk about the 7-year itch in marriage. I didn't believe it, dismissing it as an excuse for unfaithful men to justify their mistakes. I naively thought Hannah was different from them. At least we knew each other well, didn't we? But the truth was, Hannah had been sneaking around behind my back, only to return home and put on a facade of care and concern. 3 years into our marriage, and she couldn't even wait any longer. How impatient. Before we got married, she had solemnly sworn, raising her hand, "From this day forward, I, Hannah, will love Emily and only Emily." Hannah was the only child of the prestigious James family and the sole heir to their company. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of the wealthy Smith family. We were childhood friends, and the world always praised us as the perfect golden couple. Eventually, we got married, and everyone called it a match made in heaven. The union of the James and Smith families created a powerhouse, making them the leading enterprise in the city. When I discovered Hannah's infidelity, my first reaction wasn't to confront her but to call my parents. "Mom, I want a divorce," I said after careful consideration, cutting straight to the point. My mother immediately lashed out at me. "How could you be so thoughtless? Marriage isn't something you can just enter and exit on a whim. Have you considered us? Have you thought about the James family business?" I stayed silent. There was a commotion on the other end of the line before my father's voice came through. "Emily, what happened?" "Hannah cheated," I said reluctantly, hating to even bring it up. There was silence on both ends of the call. After a long pause, my father tried to sound casual. "Could it be a misunderstanding? Hannah doesn't seem like that kind of person." "Dad, she is that kind of person. We've always known that, haven't we?" I choked back tears. Yes, Hannah had never been the faithful type. I knew that better than anyone. Back in college, her reputation as a playboy was infamous. All these years, I had been lying to myself. My father sighed, his tone heavy. "Emily, to be honest, the Smith family's finances have been struggling these past 2 years. Without the James family's support, we might have." Before he could finish, the phone was snatched away. "Emily Smith, I don't care what you're thinking. Words mean nothing. Are you planning to go public with just your accusations? Who would believe you?" My mom's voice was so sharp it almost pierced my eardrums. I understood. The call was disconnected. "Hannah, I gave you a chance. Since you refuse to change, don't blame me for being ruthless." The rain outside pattered softly, droplets sliding down the glass. Hannah was wearing a shirt and slacks, tying her tie. I thoughtfully helped her put on her suit jacket, my expression full of concern. "Do you really have to go now?" I asked. "Yeah, Watson's boss suddenly agreed to our terms. He's leaving the country early tomorrow, so it's urgent," she replied. She ducked into the car despite the drizzle. Once seated, she rolled down the window. "Don't wait up for me. Go to bed." I nodded and reminded her seriously, "Be safe and come back early." I stood at the door, watching until her car disappeared into the darkness. If nothing unexpected happened, she probably wouldn't be back tonight. By tomorrow, she'd tell me she slept at the office. Still, being called out so late was a first. That woman must be getting more and more important, huh? I chuckled bitterly to myself and went back to the bedroom. Taking out my laptop, I started reviewing the recent internal developments of the Shoe Corporation. The Shoe Corporation's accounts had shown significant discrepancies in recent years. Even though it was part of the same supply chain as the Jiang Corporation, the Jiang Corporation was raking in huge profits while the Shoe Corporation was consistently losing money. In the end, the Shoe Corporation had no choice but to rely on the Jiang Corporation's funding to stay afloat. It wasn't just financial issues, there was also a manpower problem. Mid to high-level executives at the Shoe Corporation either resigned or jumped ship for various reasons, leaving only a handful of people behind. The abnormalities were obvious upon closer thought. Ever since I married Hannah, I hadn't been involved in the company's affairs for some time. She always told me I didn't need to do anything and could just stay home, that she'd take care of me. I thought it was because she loved me and didn't want me to work too hard. Looking back now, I realize I gave her too much credit. At this point, it was almost impossible for me to revive the Shoe Corporation on my own. I needed help. After much deliberation, I found a long-forgotten number in my phone and dialed it. The phone rang a few times before it was answered. A man's voice, hoarse and low, came through. "What's up?" "Do you have time?" I asked. There was some background noise on his end, followed by a soft chuckle. "What, you want to meet up?" I got straight to the point. "I need your help." "Let's hear it." After I explained my request, he agreed without hesitation, as if he'd been expecting it. Just as I was about to hang up, he spoke again. "I'm doing you such a big favor. What's in it for me?" "Once it's done, you can name your price," I replied. The next day, I made some stomach-soothing soup and brought it to Hannah's office. My hand was on the doorknob, ready to push it open, when a voice came from behind me. "Ma'am, Mr. Jiang is busy. Maybe you should." "Busy? Are you sure it's work he's busy with?" I interrupted the assistant. "It's fine. I'm just dropping something off for him." I gave him a faint smile and pushed the door open. As expected, there were two people inside. When they saw me, they hurriedly separated. I pretended not to notice and walked calmly to the desk, placing the thermos on top. "Busy?" I asked softly. Hannah cleared her throat and glanced at the woman. "No, you can go now." Yes, she was tough. I could see the unwillingness in her eyes, so I stopped her. "If you're not busy, why don't you sit down and have some soup with us?" I made some. Hannah immediately became anxious. "Why are you asking her to stay? Didn't you make it for me?" I smiled gently, opened the insulated container, and said, "Anyone who can show up in your office must not be a nobody." Then I gave Hannah a pointed look. "Aren't you going to introduce her?" In truth, I had already looked into her background, but I was more curious to hear how Hannah would explain it. "She's just an intern, nothing worth introducing," Hannah said, scratching her head in frustration. Feigning surprise, I said, "An intern? Well, then she definitely deserves an introduction. What kind of intern gets to walk straight into the CEO's office on their first day?" Hannah froze for a moment. As I handed her a bowl of soup, I frowned. "Why are you so nervous? It's not like you've done anything to betray me." After saying that, I patted her on the shoulder. Turning around, I filled a second bowl and said, "Come join us, Jessica." Jessica looked startled. "How do you know my name?" I smiled and gestured toward the name badge on her chest. Only then did she relax. "Thank you, Mrs. CEO." But I knew far more than just her name. After Jessica left the office, Hannah finally let out a sigh of relief. She pulled me over to the couch and asked, "Why did you suddenly come by? You didn't come home last night, and I was a little worried," I said, feigning reproach. Hannah closed her eyes and leaned on my shoulder. "Blame me. I've just been too busy lately." I held her close and suddenly said, "Honey, I want to start working at the company." She opened her eyes. "You don't want to stay at home anymore?" I shook my head. "No, it's just that you're so busy. I want to help share the load." "There's no need. You can just relax at home. I've got everything under control at the company. Don't worry." She let out a breath of relief and kissed me lightly on the cheek. Just like before, she still didn't want me involved in the company's affairs. I accepted it calmly. "All right." Before leaving, I asked her, "So, my busy husband, when will you have time to spend with me?" She chuckled softly. "This weekend. I'll take you out for dinner." "Okay." After confirming that she'd be at the office for the next few days, I pulled out my phone and found the contact I was looking for. "Are you free this afternoon?" I asked directly. "Why so urgent? Don't I even get a proper invitation?" the person replied. I kept my tone cold. "Are you coming or not?" All right, set the time and place." When I arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window. He was wearing a light gray sweatshirt, looking just as he always had. When he saw me, he smiled and waved. I walked over and sat down across from him. "Long time no see, Scott." Oliver, one of the most renowned lawyers in the city, was also a college friend of both Hannah and me. Back in school, the three of us were inseparable. Hannah was infamous as the campus playboy, changing girlfriends more often than clothes. I was the teacher's pet, always obedient and excelling in academics. Oliver was the odd one out among us. He wasn't originally from the area. His parents' circumstances had forced him to leave his hometown. He was quiet, but his actions were always swift and decisive. The three of us, who seemingly had nothing in common, somehow formed an oddly harmonious trio. The year I graduated from college, Hannah and I were preparing to get engaged. Oliver had left the city at some point, though I wasn't sure when. Everyone said I was lucky to have managed to settle someone like Hannah, who was known for her carefree and playful nature. Only Oliver remained silent, saying nothing. On the day of the engagement, Oliver didn't show up. He only sent me a text, "Congratulations on your engagement. Let me know if you ever need anything." I didn't think much of it, and replied politely with a simple, "Thank you." Little did I know that a casual remark from the past would one day become my last shred of hope. The waiter brought over the coffee I had ordered, pulling me back to the present. Oliver glanced at the iced Americano in front of me and frowned. "Didn't you used to hate bitter drinks like this? Why are you ordering them now?" He was right. I used to have an insatiable sweet tooth, and I wouldn't have touched coffee unless absolutely necessary. I opened my laptop and replied with a hint of irony, "People change. Let's get started." Oliver, true to his reputation as a lawyer, was articulate and methodical as he spoke. Time slipped away unnoticed, and soon the sky outside began to darken. Oliver glanced out the window. "Let's call it a day for now. We can continue next time." I nodded and started packing up my things. "Thank you. I really appreciate your help." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his hands behind his head. "Helping the top student of our year, it's my honor." I gave a bitter smile. What good is being smart? I've still ended up failing. Oliver lowered his gaze, saying nothing. I stood up, ready to leave. "Today's coffee is on me. Consider it tuition." As I walked to the cafe's entrance, I noticed Hannah's family driver still waiting outside. "Didn't I tell you to head back earlier?" I asked. The driver opened the car door for me and replied, "Mr. James was worried about you. He asked me to stay." I got into the back seat without saying another word. My phone was devoid of any messages from Hannah. So this was his idea of worrying, sending a driver to follow me. When I got home, I saw a Maybach parked outside. It was Hannah's favorite car to drive. He was back. Feeling a bit lighter, I walked toward the staircase, only to be stopped by his voice. "Emily, where were you today?" I turned around to see Hannah leaning against the sofa, his expression unusually stern. I didn't ask why he had suddenly come home, but instead feigned surprise. "I went shopping," I said, setting my bag down and casually leaning against him. "Really?" He cupped my face, studying me intently as if trying to catch a lie. I frowned. "Why would I lie to you? My shopping bags are still in the car." There were so many that I was going to ask Mr. Wang to bring them in later. Then, as if something had just occurred to me, I added, "Oh, and guess what? I ran into an old friend while I was out. Can you guess who?" Hannah forced a slight smile. "I have no idea." "Who was it?" I playfully tapped his chest. "You didn't even try to guess." "Fine, I'll just tell you. It was Oliver." At the mention of that name, Hannah's expression faltered slightly. What did you two talk about?" I started counting on my fingers. "Oh, everything, life, work, what we've been up to. And guess what? Oliver's doing pretty well for himself. He's a fairly well-known lawyer now." "Is that so?" Hannah ruffled my hair. I nodded proudly, as if I were the one he was praising. Hannah pulled me into his arms and hesitated before speaking. "Emily, could you stay away from him?" "Why?" I lifted my head from his embrace, feeling uneasy. He seemed a bit awkward, but eventually pressed his forehead against mine, his voice low and soothing. "Be good, listen to me." I didn't quite understand, but I nodded firmly. Seeing my reaction, he chuckled softly and leaned in to kiss me. I subtly avoided it, slipping out of his hold. "Oh, right. You promised to have dinner with me the day after tomorrow. I bought some new clothes today. Help me pick which one looks best." He leaned back on the sofa, relaxing as he looked at me with a gentle smile. "No need to try them on. You'll look good in anything." For a moment, I was dazed. Once upon a time, he had said the same thing to me. Back then, I had just started learning how to do makeup, though my skills were still clumsy. If makeup enhanced others' beauty, for me, it felt unnecessary, like gilding the lily. I didn't dare wear makeup at home, nor did I have the courage to flaunt it at school. So, I would always sneak to the back of the staircase during lunch breaks, when fewer people were around, to practice in secret. Before class started, I'd rush to the bathroom to wash it all off. One lunch break, I grabbed my little tools and snuck out again. While applying lipstick, a basketball suddenly rolled in, hitting the wall and bouncing to my feet. Soon after, I heard footsteps approaching. I couldn't dodge in time and bumped right into someone. Before he could finish, I covered his mouth with my hand. "Don't yell and I'll let you go," I whispered near his ear. Unable to speak, he obediently nodded. "What are you doing?" he asked, curious. I turned on a small nightlight and leaned my face closer to him. "Do you notice anything different about me?" "You put on makeup?" "Yup. Does it look good?" He didn't answer, but I could see his body shaking with laughter. "Great. Another failure." I tossed the ball back at him. "Stop laughing. Take your ball and leave." It took him a while to stop laughing. "Don't wear makeup anymore. You look beautiful without it." The inexplicable flutter of young hearts, his words made me blush. Seeing my silence, he thought I didn't believe him. He set the ball down, lifted my face and said, "Really, I'm not lying." We were so close that I could feel his breath. Almost instinctively, he kissed me. It wasn't until someone called his name from the stairwell that I snapped out of it and pushed him away. He picked up the ball, ruffled my hair, and said, "Wait for me." Embarrassed, I couldn't lift my head. "Just go." His footsteps gradually faded, and I gasped for air. The stairwell was so dark that without the nightlight, I wouldn't have been able to see the expression on his face. But when he said those 4 words, his eyes seemed to hold an entire galaxy. Now, the lights in the house were glaringly bright, yet I couldn't read him anymore. He said, "You should go rest in your room. I'm going to take a shower." With that, I turned and walked upstairs. Oliver and I still kept in touch, but Hannah's control over me was stricter than I had imagined. Because of this, I always used a spare phone to contact Oliver, and I went out alone whenever I could. After that day, I became more cautious. That weekend, Hannah didn't go to work. He said he had booked a high-end restaurant and that we'd go together in the evening. Dinner went smoothly if you ignored Hannah's constantly buzzing phone. I set down my fork. "You should answer it. It might be something urgent." Hannah glanced at me, sighed, and then stepped aside to take the call. I was happy for the quiet and continued eating on my own. A few minutes later, Hannah hurried back, looking like he had something to say but couldn't find the words. Understanding his hesitation, I said, "If it's urgent, you should go." Hannah gave me an apologetic look but didn't stop putting on his coat. "Sorry, Emily. I'll make it up to you next time." "Go ahead." I nodded, standing up to help straighten his collar. "Will you be back tonight?" He paused for a moment. "No, probably not." "All right." I obediently picked up his phone from the table and handed it to him. He kissed the top of my head. "Go to bed early. Don't wait up for me." After watching him drive away, I returned to my seat only to find someone else sitting next to me. "How did I never realize you were such a good actress?" The man's voice carried a hint of amusement. I stuffed a bite of food into my mouth and mumbled, "How did I never realize you were so good at hiding?" The flickering light cast shadows across Oliver's face, his expression unreadable. "Are you really going to go up against him?" I nodded. "If you don't want to be involved, you can still back out now." But he shook his head. "I told you before, I'll help you, no matter what, then or now." I gave a bitter smile as memories flooded my mind once again. There was a time when Hannah and I had a fight. The reason? Another rumor about him and a new girl. "Wow, Hannah, you sure are busy. Already on to a new girlfriend?" I said sarcastically. Hannah jumped off the desk and walked over to me. "What's this? Are you jealous?" I sneered. "Jealous of you? Don't flatter yourself." He ignored my tone, looking completely indifferent. "If you don't like it, I'll break it off. It's just for fun anyway." "You!" I was so frustrated I couldn't find the words. At some point, Oliver had entered the classroom without me noticing. He sat down beside me and handed me a piece of candy. "Don't pay attention to him, you know how he is." I popped the candy into my mouth. "Oliver, I'm not wrong, am I?" Seeing him nod, I smiled brightly. Hannah, however, wasn't pleased. He threw a ball against the wall. "Oliver, what's your deal? Trying to steal from me?" Oliver calmly opened his book, his tone pointed. "If you don't care about something, someone else will." Looking back, it was clear even then that Hannah's true nature had already shown itself. I was just fooling myself all along. He hadn't changed. He was simply reverting to who he'd always been. The day Hannah came back, I secretly took his flash drive and left it on the coffee table at home, pretending to stumble upon it. Using the excuse of returning it, I went to his office. The scene was all too familiar, the same place, the same 3 people. It was obvious Hannah had quite a few secrets. I smirked to myself, maintaining a composed demeanor. "Oh, Marcus is here too," I said, watching their forced smiles freeze on their faces. A strange sense of satisfaction washed over me, as if I'd caught them red-handed. Hannah quickly dismissed Marcus with a few words, leaving just the 2 of us. "Why are you here?" he asked. I slid the flash drive across the desk toward him. "You left this behind, didn't you?" Hannah's eyes lit up. "I was just worried I wouldn't be able to find it." I raised an eyebrow. "Worried?" Hannah paused mid-motion as she was transferring files onto a USB drive, her expression turning a bit sour. What are you talking about, Emily?" I shook my head, feeling a little wronged. "It just seems like you treat that intern very differently. Come on, don't overthink it. He's just an intern my family is a little concerned about, that's all." Hannah said with a faint smile. I smiled back but didn't say anything. What kind of intern spends every day sitting in the CEO's office? What kind of intern can call you away with one phone call, even when we're finally having a long overdue dinner together? I wanted to question her like I used to, but I couldn't. My family had told me to behave, to be obedient, to go along with whatever Hannah wanted. Maybe there would come a day when I'd tear off this mask, but today wasn't that day. After leaving Hannah's office, I wandered around the company for a bit. Sure enough, I spotted a few familiar faces among the senior management at her company. People who should have been part of my family's company. When I left her company, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to my family's company. Unlike visiting Hannah's company, I didn't need any excuses or reasons to come here. The atmosphere at my family's company was completely different. The employees lacked the enthusiasm I'd seen at Hannah's. As I walked around, I noticed most of them were slacking off, just doing the bare minimum to earn their base salary. Eventually, I ended up in the break room where I overheard a conversation. Seriously, what's the point of us being here every day when the company is on the brink of collapse? Even though things aren't looking great for the company, it's still backed by Hannah's firm. Besides, the base salary here isn't bad. Who wouldn't want to sit around and get paid for doing nothing? True, it'll probably hold out for a few more years. By then, we can just find another job. The two employees finished filling their water bottles and walked out, only to see me standing there. I looked at them seriously and said, "The company won't collapse," before heading straight to the CEO's office. My dad was buried in a mountain of paperwork, looking completely overwhelmed. He glanced at me briefly. "Emily, you're back. Sit down, sit down. Dad's really busy right now. We'll talk later." I walked over and pressed down on the stack of papers in front of him. He frowned in irritation. "Don't mess around. I'm busy." "Why are you doing all this yourself? What's the point of having employees if they're just taking money and doing nothing?" I said, both angry and heartbroken. He froze for a moment at my words, then sighed. "The senior management we used to have all left for some reason. The ones who are left don't understand these critical tasks. I don't trust them to handle it." After some hesitation, I made a call. "I need to borrow a few people," I said directly. "For what?" The man's voice on the other end was lazy and unhurried. "To help train my company's staff," I replied succinctly. Oliver, who understood my situation, didn't ask too many questions. "All right, I'll pick a few for you. You'll have to manage them yourself." Oliver had built his company from scratch. Though it wasn't based in New York, I'd heard it was a significant operation. He had always been highly efficient, and that hadn't changed. Not long after, the receptionist called to inform me that some visitors had arrived. While waiting, I reviewed the resumes Oliver had sent me. The candidates were all graduates from prestigious universities with extensive experience. Oliver had personally mentored them, so I felt confident in trusting them with the work. They adapted quickly. By the end of the afternoon, they had already grasped the company's overall situation. After discussing among themselves, they each chose a department to manage and immediately got to work. My dad was a bit taken aback. "Can we really trust them?" he asked. I picked up my bag, frowning. "Don't worry, I trust Oliver's character, and anyone he brings along won't be bad either." Just as I reached the office door, it was pushed open from the outside. My mom saw me, froze for a moment, and then immediately started scolding me. "Why didn't you let us know you were coming back? Stop meddling in a man's career for no reason. Stay at home and focus on your own responsibilities." Over the years, I had grown used to this. Even though I disagreed in my heart, I never argued back. So now, as usual, I just nodded and prepared to leave. She looked satisfied and then called after me. "Next month, we have a family dinner with the Smiths. You haven't forgotten, have you?" I paused, deep in thought. "A family dinner, huh? This could be a good opportunity. With Oliver's help, the profits at Emily Corp had started to rise. At least we no longer relied on funding from the Smith Corporation. But if we wanted to make a full comeback, it was still far from enough. Unknowingly, I had been learning from Oliver for almost 2 months now. I've always been a quick learner, and with my prior experience, managing company affairs wasn't difficult for me. The hard part was figuring out how to undermine the Smith Corporation. When we first got married, Hannah had made all sorts of promises and vows to me. The only tangible thing he ever did was link all his credit cards to my account. I pulled some strings and had his primary card's information changed to mine. The only thing that remained the same was that my purchase records would still show up on his phone. What he didn't know, though, was that I could also see his spending records clearly. For example, the recent charges at upscale restaurants, or tonight's hotel reservation. Hannah had told me he was on a business trip. Turns out his business trip was at a hotel. Such an interesting situation, how could I not check it out? With my bag slung over my shoulder, I spoke with the front desk at the hotel. It wasn't long before 2 figures, clearly intimate, appeared in the lobby. The 3 of us locked eyes. I feigned shock, my eyes welling up slightly. "You two?" Before Hannah could say anything, Marcus spoke up first. Mr. Smith had a bit too much to drink, so I brought him back to the hotel. "You won't be mad, will you, sis?" I didn't have time to respond before Hannah coldly questioned me. "What are you doing at the hotel?" I began, but before I could finish, I was interrupted. The front desk staff handed me a file. "Here's the report you requested, Ms. Emily." I didn't need to say anything more. The 2 people in front of me were left speechless. I tapped the report on Hannah's shoulder. "Perhaps, Mr. Smith, before booking a room, you should check who owns this hotel." Hannah's cold expression began to crumble. I left the 2 of them behind and drove home. I had barely sat down for a few minutes when I heard the hurried sound of footsteps at the door, quick and urgent, as if the person couldn't wait. "Emily, listen to me." Hannah hugged me. I pushed his hands away, took a sip of tea, and said, "Go ahead, I'm listening. There's nothing between Marcus and me. Today was a misunderstanding. I didn't come home because I know you don't like the smell of alcohol." Hannah's face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot. I gently touched his face, my voice soft. "I didn't say there was anything between you two. I believe you. Don't let me down." He hugged me tightly. "I won't." I gripped the fabric of his shirt a little tighter. "Next week is the family dinner. Make some time and let's go together." "All right." On the day of the family dinner, I chose a black and white long dress that exuded elegance and grace. Hannah, as always, wore a black suit. I had to admit, standing together, we looked like a perfect match. But the truth was, our family had long since fallen apart. It was rare for us all to gather on a single day, yet there was one unwelcome guest, Marcus. "Hello, Aunt and Uncle," Marcus greeted sweetly, his voice almost saccharine. "Hannah," he added, leaning toward him. He completely ignored the rest of us, making it seem like our family were outsiders. Quietly, I withdrew my hand that had been resting on Hannah's arm, but he caught it and held on. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied with a smile, walking toward the dining table. "I'm a little hungry." After the elders took their seats, I sat down as well. I was testing something, testing whether Hannah would choose me or Marcus. I thought the situation was obvious, but I miscalculated. Hannah sat beside me, and Marcus took the seat on his other side. During dinner, I barely spoke. After a few bites, I lost my appetite. In contrast, Marcus kept talking incessantly, oblivious to the fact that Grandpa James had always valued the rule of silence during meals. When I noticed Grandpa frown, I couldn't help but smile to myself. Using the excuse of needing the restroom, I left the table, taking a moment to breathe in the hallway before heading to freshen up. As I was applying lipstick, I noticed in the mirror that someone else had entered the room. "Can't eat any more, sis?" Marcus asked, smiling, though his eyes were filled with malice. "My appetite hasn't been great lately," I replied, putting the lipstick back in my bag and preparing to leave. But Marcus blocked the door, his expression arrogant. "Sis, they say the older, the wiser. Now it seems." He trailed off, his eyes scanning me up and down before letting out a mocking laugh. I shot back, "It seems you're still too young to understand what it means to respect boundaries. If some dogs can't be leashed, maybe it's better to just let them run free." The veins on Marcus's neck bulged. "What do you mean by that?" I pushed his hand away from the door. "Nothing. Just that the family's golden retriever has been misbehaving lately." When I returned to the table, Hannah leaned over. "What took you so long?" My stomach felt a bit off, so I stepped out for some air, I said as I sat down. Robert and Elizabeth, noticing I was back, brought up a topic. "Emily, you and Hannah have been married for a few years now. Why haven't there been any developments?" I realized they were talking about children. Embarrassed, I leaned against Hannah's shoulder. He put his arm around me and said, "Blame me, I've been too busy." The conversation quickly turned into the family chastising Hannah, urging him to balance work and family and to have a child while he was still young. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Marcus glaring at me, his jealousy practically written across his face. I pretended not to notice and continued to act affectionate with Hannah. Whatever his relationship with Hannah was, at least during the family dinner, I was the one who held the legitimate title of his wife. Hannah got drunk that night. By the time we got home, he was completely out of it. After helping him to bed and tidying up, I stood in the doorway, backlit by the light, watching him sleep soundly. "Hannah, you've let me down again," I murmured softly, closing the door behind me. I walked to the living room, took out my phone, and called my assistant. "Freeze Hannah's accounts." All the cards under Hannah's name were actually funded by the hard-earned money of Emily's family. That night, for the first time, I didn't stay at the James's house. Instead, I rushed to Emily's family business to work overtime, transferring the last portion of shares. If a relationship can't be sustained, then let it end, gracefully. The next day, Hannah called me, her tone a bit anxious. "Emily, my cards are frozen. Can you still use yours?" Feigning surprise, I replied, "I have no idea. Could it be that you got drunk last night and accidentally did something?" She didn't know how to respond. She probably didn't realize that after getting drunk last night, she kept murmuring Marcus's name. Does it sound like me? Maybe a little, but not the current me. If I hadn't married Hannah, perhaps I would have been like Marcus, arrogant and indulgent, relying on family connections and power. I knew Hannah had always been searching for the old version of me and Marcus, not the obedient and well-behaved person I had become. All that talk about taming a playboy or being the perfect wife, those were just labels the outside world slapped on us, based on what they wanted to see. I was never a pushover. Marriage had only temporarily changed me. "Can you transfer me some money, Emily?" Hannah pleaded desperately. Before I could respond, I heard a voice on the other end of the line. "Miss James, there's another meeting scheduled." "What meeting? Push it back," Hannah barked. "The shareholders' meeting," the voice replied. "Be good and attend the meeting first. I'll come to the office to find you," I reassured her. I never thought the day would come when I could make Hannah listen to me. Perhaps she had no choice but to obey. She hung up reluctantly. At the shareholders' meeting, everyone was present except for one empty seat. That seat was reserved for the representative of Emily's family. "Does anyone know why the representative isn't here?" someone asked. "Didn't your wife tell you?" Another person chimed in. Hannah's face turned slightly awkward. "She's just a woman. She doesn't concern herself with these matters." I heard everything clearly from behind the door. Well, I decided to concern myself with it. I pushed the door open and walked in, sitting in the empty seat amidst the confused stares of everyone. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Hannah looked genuinely stunned. "I told you I'd come to the office to find you," I said calmly, flipping over the nameplate on the table. It read, "Emily's family representative." Hannah wanted to say something, but the chairman interrupted her. "Now that everyone is here, let's officially begin the shareholders' meeting." During the meeting, representatives from various companies actively voiced their opinions, myself included. Fueled by a sense of revenge, the more uncomfortable Hannah looked, the more satisfied I felt. In the end, the chairman made the final decision. I, as the largest shareholder, would assume the role of CEO. After everyone left, Hannah remained seated, staring blankly. "What's the meaning of this?" Her voice trembled. I sat across from her, leaning back in my chair. "What do you think it means, dear?" "You lied to me." She slammed the table and stood up. "I've never lied to you. If you're going to accuse me, Miss James, you'd better have evidence," I said, crossing my arms and watching her like I was enjoying a show. At that moment, there was a knock on the conference room door. Through the glass, I saw a pair of familiar leather shoes. It seemed Hannah's heartbreak was about to deepen. "Come in," I said in a low voice. As expected, it was Oliver. "What are you doing here?" Hannah shouted at him. Oliver didn't even spare her a glance and walked straight toward me. "Emily, here's the agreement you asked for." "What agreement? What have you two been doing behind my back?" Hannah strode toward us. "Didn't I tell you to stay away from her?" I threw the divorce papers in front of her. "Just sign them already and get it over with," I said as I turned to leave. I'm not sure which words triggered Hannah, but all I heard was her hysterical shouting in the conference room. That evening, when I got home, Hannah was already sitting on the couch. I heard from others that she hadn't returned to the office since the shareholders' meeting that morning. I ignored her and went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. She followed me in and tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Emily, can we talk? Please don't go through with a divorce," she pleaded. I let out a cold laugh. "Talk about what? About your affairs?" Hannah's face shifted, her lips twitching. "It's not like that, Emily. Let me explain." Still trying to deny it, I walked over to the entryway, opened a drawer, and pulled out a stack of envelopes. I took out the contents and threw them in her face. "Explain what? That I've been too obedient all these years, and you thought I was stupid?" Hannah knelt on the floor, scrambling to pick up the photos, only to give up in frustration and let them fall again. She grabbed the hem of my pants, her eyes red. "I was wrong, Emily. Please don't leave me." I shook her hand off like it was trash, full of disdain. "I gave you chances. You're the one who kept lying to me over and over again." I had hinted multiple times that Marcus's presence had crossed the line, but Hannah never took it seriously. I left evidence of her infidelity in plain sight at the entryway, where anyone paying attention would notice it. But nearly 3 months passed, and she didn't realize a thing. "Hannah, I'm exhausted. Let's end this." I stepped past her and locked myself in the study. Later that evening, Oliver invited me out. When I realized Hannah wasn't home, I didn't care. None of it mattered to me anymore. At the cafe, Oliver was already seated when I arrived. "Thanks for helping me this time," I said, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting down. He handed me the menu. "No need to thank me." I ordered a hot cocoa. Oliver chuckled softly. "No coffee this time?" "Just doing what feels comfortable," I replied, my words carrying a deeper meaning. Oliver looked at me, his gaze intense. "You're amazing. If anyone's at fault here, it's Hannah. Why, though?" I smiled faintly but didn't answer. The sound of children playing came from behind us. Both Oliver and I turned to look. A little boy was trying to snatch another child's toy. As they chased each other, they ran past our table. I stopped the boy. "Don't you have your own toys?" "Why are you taking someone else's?" I asked. The boy pushed me aside. "It's different. I haven't played with his toy before." Then he ran off. I shrugged and looked back at Oliver. "See? Even kids understand this." Oliver understood my point and lowered his gaze, saying nothing more. The wind chime at the door suddenly jingled, signaling another customer entering the shop. The person walked straight to our table. "Emily, the reason you want a divorce isn't just because of me, is it?" I looked up. It was Hannah. I took a sip of my hot cocoa. "It has nothing to do with you." "Ha, I knew it," she said, throwing a punch toward Oliver. Oliver raised his hand and effortlessly caught her wrist. "Don't cause trouble here," he said coldly. "Oliver, stealing your friend's wife? What kind of man does that make you?" Hannah questioned. Oliver released her wrist and wiped his hand with a damp tissue, his disdain evident. "Oh? And cheating on your wife with someone else, is that something to be proud of?" Hannah opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off. "Let's part ways peacefully, Hannah. The person you used to be is already gone. We're all adults here. Let's not drag this out." Whether she listened or not, the next morning, the divorce papers on the coffee table in the living room were signed and ready. On the day of the divorce, Hannah and I walked out of the courthouse together. "Emily, is there really no way you can forgive me?" she asked quietly. "From the moment you started messing around with Marcus, you should have known this day would come," I replied, staring straight ahead. "Can't we at least stay friends?" Hannah called out behind me. "I already told you," I said, not turning back as I walked away. "The person you used to be is long gone." After that, I had no further contact with Hannah. I don't even know when she stopped showing up at the office. All I remember is that day. The breeze on my face felt gentle, and around the corner at that coffee shop, there sat a boy who looked just like he did in the past. He said, "Emily, the reward I want is you.